Welcome back to Heads Up with Em. Today's guest is the definition of when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. Andrew Rhodes is an extraordinary Australian who, after being diagnosed with brain cancer and then facing a devastating reoccurrence, chose not to slow down but to rise. With an unshakable positive attitude and a deeply motivated spirit, Andrew took on one of Norway's hardest hiking challenges, the 350-kilometre massive Ruta, becoming the first Australian on record to complete it. His story is one of resilience, courage, and the power of mindset, and we're so excited to have him here on Heads Up with Em to share it with us. So, welcome back to another episode of Heads Up with Em, and today we are joined with Andrew Rhodes. Andrew, tell us a bit about yourself and take us back to your initial diagnosis and what that was like for you.
Yeah, I feel like that's such an open question, but I am currently 36 years old, living in Melbourne and working as a hiking guide, which is a stark contrast to where I was about 5 years ago when I was diagnosed with brain cancer. So that all happens back in 2021, which was such a weird time for the world in general, because I feel as though we just come out of the worst of COVID, but particularly in Melbourne, we were still navigating the effects and lockdowns were still present. But I'd had such a crazy year leading up to then anyway. Like, obviously with COVID, previously I was living overseas. I'd spent a year in Norway and 4 or 5 years in London, and then I was sort of in LA and looking to hopefully establish myself in LA, and had come back to Australia during the Christmas period and was visiting my brother in Melbourne, and then things started to happen and COVID essentially hit while I was in this sort of transition period back in Melbourne. And yeah, so we ended up staying in this city. And then I guess fast forward a year, the business I'd been working on prior to COVID had not survived that period. And then I just basically got back on, I wouldn't say back on my feet. Like I never was down and out. It was just a period that really changed things for me from a career standpoint and just sort of priorities, I think. But I had essentially gotten a job back in a creative industry, which was very important to me, which obviously COVID had taken me out of that sector. And then, funnily enough, I was thinking about this recently. The Monday of the week that I was diagnosed,
Yeah.
I'd just been pre-approved for a mortgage. So I was like, had a job, had been pre-approved for a mortgage, and had sort of weathered this storm from the year before, and had felt like I'd come out the other side in good shape and good spirits. And then basically I'd been having trouble equalizing my ears, which was something that turned out to be completely unrelated to the tumor that they discovered, but from the scans and everything, looking to find out what was causing that problem. Incidentally, they found a tumor on my brain that was the size of a billiard ball.
Wow.
Just there, just without any symptoms. And that was something that changes your world overnight.
It doesn't feel real because, I mean, my symptoms are very minimal because you can't see it. And they're like telling me, how is this, something so serious going on? And I really can't see it. The scans can be confronting, definitely. Then you see it. But are those mine?
And even for me, the weirdest part about it was I was not terribly worried about the scans that I had to have for the problem with my ears. And even obviously I had one scan that showed that there was something more sinister going on. So I was seeing an ear, nose and throat specialist, and his secretary called me and said, hey, we've just had to reorganize an MRI that I'd already had scheduled in, but they were going to change the type of MRI that I was having to a brain scan with contrast.
Yes.
And I distinctly remember that I was working from home, had the phone sort of up to my ear, and she said contrast. I just Googled what that meant, because at that time I didn't actually know what contrast was.
Yeah.
I'm a huge needle phobe. So as soon as I realized that she was now suggesting that I needed to have this scan quite urgently, but with contrast, it didn't really well, I didn't really comprehend that something else was going on. I was just more worried the fact that I had to go there and have a cannula put in to have this contrast dye injected for the scan. So in a weird way, that almost protected me from thinking too much about what was going on and why they were having to change the type of scan that I was having. And then I had that, and the same receptionist called me and just said that the doctor would like to see you to tell you the results. And that was a thing as well. I think I just maybe downplayed it in my mind, or didn't really think that anything serious or sinister was going on. So I was at work and basically just said to my colleagues, I'm just going to duck out for an hour. I just got to go see the doctor. And
Yeah.
then I just drove to Cabrini Hospital and went to the rooms of my ENT. And then he just sat me down and basically told me that I had this very large tumor on my brain, which was something that I was not anticipating. And I think being there by myself was quite a surreal experience, just sort of getting delivered this life-changing news and just sitting there essentially alone.
Kind of like having that information as well. You're like, for this one moment, I have this information with me,
Yeah.
and I know I'm going to have to, it's not going to be like this forever. This information is going to be shared.
Yeah. And he said, and he was right in saying it, that sometimes the hardest part about receiving news like this is telling other people, particularly your loved ones. And he offered to call my family, which he tried to, and no one picked up the phone. So I think after his second missed call, I just said, don't worry, I'll tell them. I'll just head off and basically deal with that myself. And I think that was hard, even leaving his rooms, because you sort of walk down the stairs. I remember sort of going into a lot of the hospital bathrooms and basically just splashing water in my face and just sort of trying to comprehend what I just learned, and I guess try and get some resolve to realize that this is going to be a very big thing that I'll have to deal with. And yeah, it's going to take a lot of energy, and courage is probably not the right word, but I think you realize that you're in for a big fight, and that
Yes.
you're going to need everything that you've got to fight it. So,
Yeah.
but then even those like sort of intimate moments that you have by yourself, it's still not quite real because you haven't let the outside world know. And I think it wasn't until I actually tried to call my parents, and my dad picked up the phone, and I just couldn't speak. And that's sort of when everything hits you, and you realize that you've got to deliver this not very nice news to people that you love. And you, I always remember speaking to my mum, especially, and I could just hear her heartbreak over the phone. And that's probably harder than receiving the news itself, because I think you can deal with a lot of things alone and process it and be stoic. And it's not until you see the people that you love get affected by the news that you're delivering to them, it really hits you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. And I was in the exact same boat. And like, we moved in with my parents to get the support. And as helpful as that was, I was watching their grief while trying to process mine. And it's a really hard kind of balance.
But I do remember that day. That was one of those instances where you start to see positive things come out of such a situation, because I always remember like I stupidly tried to drive home and very quickly realized that I was in no state to drive. It was just, my mind was everywhere, and staying on the road was not the biggest thing going on in my head. So I remember pulling over and just calling my brother, and he just said, stay where you are. I'm jumping in an Uber and I'm going to come and get you. And I think it was one of those instances, like he's my older brother, and it just really demonstrated to me how people in those situations can really step up. And I think he really just became that figure in my life that came there to protect me on that day, and really just sort of took control of the situation, like really understood where I was at. And you just look back on that, and you realize that these people in your life sort of have this inner capability that they probably don't necessarily have the reason, or have reasons to show that it's there very often, but when it matters and when it's important, they were there. And even that day, like my brother sort of, I think, was the person was broke the news to most of my family and friends. And I think after that happened, you just feel this this wave of love and support come towards you. I think my phone was just sort of running off the hook, just with messages of support and love. And I think it was when I really understood the phrase, like, riding the wave of love and support.
Hmm.
And you really feel that. And I think that also really helps you because it's probably one of the lowest points you'll have in your life, receiving news like that, and just sort of knowing that you're not alone and people actually care about you and love you and want the best for you. I think that's something that obviously you don't want anyone to go through this situation, but it is nice that that can happen and that people are there for you.
When your family and loved ones show their love, it makes a huge difference. And sometimes it's so surprising, the people who come back and then re-enter your life and send that message if you haven't heard of them in such a long time. I think it's really powerful as well. Yeah, so then you went on to have your obviously your surgery, and what was surgery and recovery like for you?
It was difficult. I think there's no way to sugarcoat it.
Mhm.
I always remember the week that I spent in hospital was probably the toughest week of my life. I was in so much pain and, I could barely walk. I was just sort of, I think I was trying to describe it to people. It felt like someone had hit me in the head with an axe, and painkillers would do so much, but even I really despised the painkillers that I was on because they just made me go into this world that I didn't love. So it's like it's sort of balance of, do you try and have these painkillers to stop the pain? But when you have the painkillers, I was in this like terrible, dark, hallucinating world, which I just really didn't like. So that was so tough. And then going home, because obviously you essentially go into hospital well and you leave this very sick person that you
Yes.
feels recognize. And I just became someone who just slept all the time, and I was like nauseous all the time. And even just sort of walking the 20 steps from my bedroom to the kitchen to eat a meal was enough to send you back to bed for 6 hours because it was so exhausting. And you find a lot about yourself and what you're capable of. Because I always remember before I went into surgery, I was recommended by my brother to go and see a psychologist, which I think was a very wise piece of advice that he gave me. So I essentially saw a psychologist the week before I went into surgery, and I always remember something that he said to me that really just stayed in my brain, and like even to this day, I still think about it. He just said that in his line of work, he sees people in my situation go through hardships, and you sort of essentially have two choices. You can sort of give in and learn this sense of helplessness, or you can fight it and be the person in the hospital that's doing push-ups and like pushing yourself every day and fighting that inner struggle to get better and to get well. And I think I know the sort of person that I am, and just having Dennis say that so succinctly and just so simply, it's just such a nice sort of thing to take with me, just to always reflect on and just know that whenever you're having a tough time, or even, yeah, obviously I had to work like quite intensively with a physio to even just, walk normally again, and working with a speech pathologist to get my speech back because I'd have instances where I just couldn't speak. And then working like with an occupational therapist to sort of try and fine tune those cognitive skills so you could get back to a place where you could work again. It's just, yeah, it takes a lot. And I think they can be very confronting periods. Like even I remember working with the OT, and I've sort of always prided myself of being quite good academically and never sort of worrying about my cognitive ability. And then you do these simple tests and you just sit there with this blank mind and just go, I don't know how to do this.
Definitely. After when I was in recovery, I resonate with that so much because I was in quite a dark space in that first week at home. And then at one point I just thought, okay, like I have this news and I have these results. It's not going to change. Nothing's going to change right now. So I can either enjoy this moment, I can either have, even if it's something simple, like have a good conversation with my family, enjoy this moment with my kids, or I can not and just feel all the self-pity in the world and let myself think about all the terrible things that could happen. But it's not really going to change the outcome because I don't know. While I might have been given this terrible news, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I don't know. So why am I just letting it take control of my every not just day to day, like every single movement?
And I was so lucky that I had such a supportive family because I was based in Melbourne and still am, but my parents are in Sydney. And basically, as soon as I told them the news, like 3 days later, they moved to Melbourne for 6 months and were with me the whole time with surgery and recovery. And I think I
Thing.
was so lucky to have that support from them because they, carried such a heavy load just to help me get back on my feet. And even just things like I hated being alone because I think just in that process where you're exhausted and you're in pain and it's just not a nice place to be. And just little things like my mom or my dad just sitting beside me on the bed while I was sleeping, but just knowing that there was someone there was just so reassuring and just helps so much just to know that you're loved. And I think that's such a big part of recovery, just the people around you, just showing you that love. And it makes you want to work harder in your recovery too, because all these people are, they're giving up their time for you to make sure that you get better. And there becomes that sense of working as a team and essentially.
Yeah, it is a team. It really is like that. Your support network, you're an entire team. Yeah.
Yeah. All the progress that you make, they share in that as well. And it's such a beautiful thing to have that. So I do feel very lucky that I am in that situation where I do have like some very, very, loving and special people around me and still do.
That's so good. And at what point now, Andrew, you've gone on to do some really amazing things post-diagnosis, especially only within the first 5 years of your diagnosis. At what point in your recovery or later on were you like, okay, I'm gonna do more than this. I want more for myself and I'm gonna start pushing myself to new limits.
I think for me, it almost goes back to the moment that I was about to go into surgery. I remember having this wave of calm wash over me. I was literally sitting or lying down on the bed, just like about to be anesthetized to go into surgery. And I think with anyone going to brain surgery, like you're literally told, like you could die on the table. This is not some easy operation. Even though I think my surgeon described it, it's like it's a 1 in 1,000 chance that you could die. Something could go wrong and you could be blind, or there's so many things that can go wrong. Like you're literally cutting into your brain. It's not to be taken lightly. And I remember even with that coming up, I just had this wave of calm wash over me. And I remember just being very content with my life up until that point. I'd done everything that I'd wanted to do. I'd like lived overseas. I'd like fallen in love, had my heart broken, worked in some like really cool jobs, had some like amazing experiences. And I remember just thinking to myself, if this is my time and my time is up, I'm happy. So then I think you look at my life now and almost feel like looking back to that moment, there's this sense of obligation to keep continuing life in that regard. Because when you get a diagnosis like this and when you sort of go through surgery and recovery and sort of have regular scans, the anxiety that goes with that, and just knowing that this sort of dark cloud is almost always chasing you, I think from my perspective, I've seen that as a reason to just live life fully and try and not get consumed in like the day-to-day things and really find purpose and what's important. And I think for me, sort of having gone through this whole period is trying to live my life fully, but also like act as an example for the people who are going through similar things, that life's not over, that it's just something that you can live with and deal with. It shouldn't stop you from doing the things that you want to do. So I think that sort of, for me, has become like doing things like hiking. I remember 2 years post-surgery, I went out and hiked the overland track in Tasmania by myself and used that as a way just to raise awareness and funds for brain cancer research, because I think anyone within this space knows that there's a lot more that can be done to assist the progress of brain cancer treatments, and money is very important to that. So, and that was even for me a very revealing experience in terms of that was the first time I'd really gone to like my wider circle of friends about my diagnosis. Like obviously like everyone close to you knows what's going on, but sort of my wider circle, it's very confronting to be like 2 years post going through this very traumatic
Yes.
experience to then be like, hey guys, this has actually happened to me, but now I'm doing this and like I want your support. And again, I think I was a bit overwhelmed with the amount of support that I got for that and just the mess and even the money, because I think I ended up raising over $40,000, which I remember when I was speaking to my brother about it before I launched the fundraising page, I said, oh, maybe I can try and get $2,000, because you see people try and raise money all the time, and it's hard because, you know, people that have limited resources, and it's not like easy to ask people for money. And
Yeah.
just the generosity that people showed, and I think within that, obviously their support for me was very obvious.
I mean, I think it's incredible. If I had heard of a friend who was going through what you went through and receiving a brain cancer diagnosis, going through their recovery, and said, then soon after said, oh, okay, also I'm going on this big hike in Tasmania. Hey, do you want to support me? I'd be like, oh my gosh, you could just ask without needing to do anything for it. But I think that's just so exciting for the people around you. So I think that that's a great motivating factor to drive donations. It's really incredible.
Yeah, and I think it was nice to bring that wider circle of friends along and sort of share that journey with them of what I'd experienced and how far I'd come, because literally I was, you know, 2 years before I couldn't walk 20 meters down the hallway, and then I was sort of, you know, embarking on this beautiful hike in the Tasmanian wilderness, and it was just so incredible. Even for me, I think it was a big achievement just to get to that point, because I knew how hard it had been to get there. So I was very proud. But then I think I got to the end of that hike, and in a weird way, I felt like I enjoyed it too much. It was almost like I was expecting it to be this like hard slog, and it would be like physically demanding and challenging. And I remember I probably had like 7 of the best days of my life, even though the weather at some points was terrible. We got rained and snowed on and everything in between, and winds. But I remember just being out there and just, I think the first afternoon that I was walking by myself into like this big sort of storm, like wind and rain just like pelting on my face. I remember I had a huge smile. I just felt, this is amazing. It's so wonderful to be alive and to be experiencing this and just to be out there. And I really appreciated what I was doing and where I'd come from. So I think that was just such just incredible experience. But then, as I said, I got to the end of it and I was like, that wasn't hard enough. So it was almost, there's this part in me that's sort of like, okay, well, I almost got guilty having raised all this money, but enjoying the experience and not suffering. I don't know necessarily why I have to suffer, but it was almost, I felt like I was cheating. So then
Wow.
my natural reaction to that was like, okay, well, what can I do that is bigger and will challenge me more? And so that's when last year I actually tried to hike in Norway, which I discovered it's called the Massive Ruta. And I discovered that it had a list of everyone who had ever completed it. There was no,
How many people had completed it?
up until last year, there was about 600 or 700.
Wow. 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 That's
And
incredible.
yeah, so it's a 350-kilometer hike in Norway that sort of goes through 4 of the mountainous national parks. And it's incredible. But so that was my goal last year, to become first Australian to complete this hike. And
Wow.
then, and I was sort of wanting it to be this big moment, and I'd sort of was planning to vlog daily from the track and try and build on the momentum that I'd started when I did the overland track, and really try and raise, yeah, more money and awareness for research with brain cancer. And then that was a hike that didn't go to plan, and a plan that didn't go to plan, because essentially I started that hike, and within 3 hours of starting on day one, the first river crossing I came to, I slipped on a rock and ripped off my big toenail. And yeah, I just remember looking down and seeing my toenail flapping in the river. And
Oh my gosh. Were you
well,
wearing shoes?
no, because I'd stupidly taken them off to cross the river. And yeah, that was my mistake.
Yeah.
And I remember getting myself out of the river and just seeing bloods like pouring out everywhere. I knew straight away the hike was done, but I think in my stubbornness, I was like, no, it's only day one. It's either 3 hours back to the start or like you keep going. So I was like, okay, let's keep going. So I essentially pushed my toenail back down onto the nail bed and taped it up and continued walking.
I'm so squeamish with nails. You could talk about brain surgery all day, but when it comes to nails, it's a real pain. Yeah.
That was a huge blow, but I essentially pushed on for 2 days and hiked 50 kilometers. A shoe that was red from blood that was leaking out. And funnily enough, the second day that I hiked, it's probably the hardest day of hiking I've ever done in my life. I hiked 13 hours in pouring rain and got to the end, got to the hut, and my phone had stopped working because my jacket pocket had been filled with water from the rain. Essentially, the phone had stopped working. So in a weird way, that was a blessing in disguise because once that was gone, I made the decision to get off the trail. And funnily enough, the first reaction to get off the trail was to fix the phone to get back on the trail. But then I think I managed to get back to Oslo, which is not an easy thing to do when you don't have a phone in a country that basically relies on everything being online.
And you're on your own.
On my own, it's like it took me about, I think, 9 or 10 hours to get back to Oslo. And then I ended up in the hospital that night having to have surgery to remove the toenail. And even talking to the doctors and the nurses, I think they realized that what I was saying was not going to happen. But I was like, just do what you need to do so I can get back out there. And they're like, no, you really rest this for 3 weeks and like you're not hiking. No, it's just like do what you need to do. But then luckily having lived in Norway, I had some just amazing friends that really came to my aid in Oslo and was able to sort of stay with them. And it wasn't until I think the next day when I was able to get back online and speak to my mother. She was the most convincing of everyone. And she was like, you're not hiking anymore. Like you need to stop. It's not worth risking something going worse and getting a big infection and who knows what could happen after that. And just,
Sometimes mother knows best.
yeah, in this instance, we definitely did. But I was glad to concede that she was right and just accept the fact that my plans were gonna happen. And I think it was a blow because that was the first time I'd ever had to pull out of a hike early. So even just from an ego point of view, I was like, no, this never happens. Like I can always get through it even if I'm in pain. But that was one thing that it was very obvious that it was not a great idea to go on. So I pulled the pin on that. And then I sort of came back to Australia, I think, with my tail between my legs a bit because I wanted to have this sort of big crowning moment that was going to make a sizable impact on the brain cancer community and going to be like a very positive thing. And I think the fact that that didn't happen just really didn't sit well with me because obviously I wanted to be this person that was out there doing things and pushing the boundaries. And I think I realized that obviously this one time I pushed the boundary too far. And I think it's also one of those things where sometimes it's better to try and to fail than to not give it a go at all. So, and then, I think then coming back into Melbourne and I'd sort of, very quickly like went through a breakup and my world sort of changed again, like the, first time since I was diagnosed. And then a couple of months after getting back, I like learned that the tumor was growing again. So then all of a sudden you have this new thing to deal with, which I remember writing about it and I described the only thing worse than getting diagnosed with brain cancer is getting told that it's back or that it's growing again. Because I think the second time around, it just felt like an absolute kick in the guts because up until that point, you sort of feel like you've regained this level of control and this level of being normal. And all of a sudden it gets pulled away from you again. And you know more of what's coming up for you. So it's almost more intimidating because I think the first time you go through it, you have this sense of naivety where everything happens so quickly and it's all new. Like, you don't know how recovery from surgery is. You don't know like the process, and you kind of just have to tough it out and go through it. But I think just knowing what that process is like, it's, you sort of dread it.
Especially when you're trying to regain your life back, because you know how long it can take and how much it's going to derail you, and you're like, part of you when you finish recovery is almost like, okay, like that chapter is closed, I know it can reopen again, but for now that chapter is closed and I'm just going to move on with my life and kind of push that to the side. So for it to re-enter so quickly, you're like, what, I have to start all over again, I've just said goodbye. And I was feeling really good about that, and that was really hard, but I'm very nervous about that for myself, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are or have been through it too. So it's a very challenging part of brain cancer that I think it's really important to talk about.
Yeah, and I think for me, it really hit me at a time where I probably wasn't at my highest point either, because like I just come back from this hike that had gone terribly, went through a breakup almost straight after that, and then all of a sudden, a month later, you're told that the news isn't great, and you're sort of just like, oh, like what else can go wrong? Because
Yeah.
you're just waiting for the next thing to happen. So yeah, it was not the best sort of 2 or 3 month period of my life, that's for sure. But then that was something that I knew was always going to happen. So you just have to kind of do it yourself and get ready to do what you have to do. And I think I've actually been very lucky and very fortunate, because there has been developments in the brain cancer space, and particularly for the type of glioma that I have. Unbeknownst to me, like this drug had recently come out of clinical trials in the US and was starting to be introduced in Australia. So essentially, I went to see my neurosurgeon, and he put me on to my oncologist, and they sort of gave me the option to go on this new treatment, which obviously for someone like me, being able to take an oral drug that in trials at least has sort of shown that it can either like slow or stop the growth of the tumor.
Yes.
A much nicer alternative than having to think about surgery or chemo or radiation.
How soon after finding out about the recurrence did you hear about the new drug that has come out?
It would have been about 2 months, I think.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe,
Yeah, in that space, did they know what the plan was?
yeah, pretty quickly. Like they knew that that was a possibility, and even like the hospital that I'm at, they were sort of in talks with the drug company to do an early access scheme for patients like myself. So I think there was sort of a handful of us at the hospital that were able to go onto this scheme that essentially, I guess in a way, is an extension of the trial, because with anything like this, they need to get more data to show how well it works. It's kind of funny because you sort of become this guinea pig within the system as well, because it's still new. That's, I think, a role that I'm very happy to take on, because hopefully it can continue to show good results and can have more positive outcomes for people in situations like ours. Because I was even hiking in New Zealand last week with a friend who's a doctor, and I think we were talking about how there's almost this misnomer that people think cancer can be cured, which is obviously the hope. Obviously, everyone hopes that that's going to be the case, but I feel like the more realistic thing is cancer becomes more treatable and becomes a chronic disease like diabetes or HIV or something like that, where you prefer not to have it, but it's manageable and you can live with it, and there's treatments available that you can take just to sort of live a normal life and just manage the disease. So with the drug, like the drug that I'm on, you hope that that's the start of this shift where having a diagnosis such as ours isn't just like an automatic death sentence. It's something that's like, okay, there's a lot of money and research, and even like with technology now, with the development of AI, I think we all hope that that's going to provide the tipping point that allows discoveries and developments to happen that can help so many people.
Definitely. I think we're living in a space of so much hope. And I just have to tell myself I'm so lucky, or at least that if I had to be diagnosed, at least it's right now when now there's so much space for hope and so much space for growth. So at least I can have that to hold on to versus absolutely nothing 10 to 15 years ago. Yeah. So you were given this news about the regrowth, and then you're on Vorsidnim, the new drug. And then at what point were you like, yeah, I'm gonna go back to Norway. I'm ready.
Yeah, I think I wasn't necessarily thinking too much about it until right before I went. So essentially, I think I just had a huge shift this year in terms like after I went in at the end of the year when I found out about my regrowth. I think I went and spent New Year's Eve with friends in Byron Bay and had a great time. And then my brother was living in Coolangatta at the time, and he was with my parents in Sydney. So I went and just spent a week by myself in his apartment, so like a week of self-care, just swimming in the ocean every morning and evening, eating healthy food, and just like having a lot of time just to relax and journal and just be kind to myself. And then I basically came back to Melbourne and started taking the drug. And even within that space, I was having slightly weird experiences because obviously going on a drug like this, they weren't sure whether that would potentially make me infertile. So my brain tumor nurse called me and said, "Well, if you do want to have kids, the safest thing to do is to go and like go to the sperm bank." So even just doing things like that, that's a funny experience for anyone who's ever done that. It's yeah. We don't need to go into the ins and outs.
Yeah. But definitely, I mean, I was offered, yeah, IVF at the age of 30 to freeze my eggs before treatment. And you're kind of like, oh, so does this mean I am giving up my fertility at the age of 30? It's not something I kind of paired with brain tumor. So you just don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Then I came back to Melbourne and just was very happy to be in the city. I think I'd obviously done a lot of travel the year before and had even, changed my lifestyle and left my job, and a lot of things were happening at once. I'd come back to Melbourne and like I decided to completely change my career and work as a hiking guide. So I was living this lifestyle where I'd taken all the work related stress out of my life. I was living a life that was just fun. And I think I was just enjoying being in Melbourne and getting to know the city. And I'd taken up cycling and had really dove into the cycling community in Melbourne and found this like really amazing niche of just great people and this shared love of bikes and riding bikes. I think I was just very happy and content being in Melbourne. Like I was living by myself, and the Norway thing, it sort of slipped to the background. I think it was a fun story to tell people about how everything went wrong, but I don't think I'd really had that many plans to go back. And then, funnily enough, I had some further scans after going on the drug, and then there was some suggestion that things might still be progressing and the drug wasn't necessarily working. So they were thinking that we might have to intervene further and go down the surgery and radiation and chemotherapy path. So I think that again sort of shook me because I thought that I was on this drug that would give me more times. And when I got that news initially, my reaction was to go and hike in the Northern Territory for 10 days. So I went and hiked the Larapinta Trail in the Northern Territory. It was an amazing experience. And then I think having done that and coming back and then sort of doing further scans, and I was very also fortunate that like my team looks at me as a human and they don't just look at me as another patient to sort of push through the system. And I'm very thankful, particularly of my oncologist. I think he was one who sort of came to the party with the different specialties and just said, Andrew's living life very fully at the moment. I think we need to be very careful about intervening in a way that's going to affect his life unless we think it's completely necessary. And I think really value his approach because it sort of just allowed me to keep living life. And he basically just said, like, let's give it another 6 to 8 weeks to give this drug every chance to show that it's working, because obviously, he's read the literature from the US and it can take 6+ months to show signs that it's actually inhibiting the growth of the tumor. So obviously we waited, and then I think during that period of waiting, I was like, stop it. Like, I want to go away again and keep living and sort of honor that self that was, lying in the anesthetist room wanting or being content with his life. I got to that point again where and I love planning. So I was just like, you know what? And I basically decided whether it was good news or bad news from the scan. I was like, I'm gonna go. Yeah. So like started planning a holiday, and I had like a one of my best friends from high school was chatting to me at the time, and he just said, "Would you be interested in going to France to watch the Tour de France?" Which is something that we'd spoken about for years when we were teenagers and growing up. And I was lucky enough to have gone over like a few years when I was living in Europe, and also went last year when I was there on the trip that ended in the failed Norwegian hike. And I think he also realized the situation that I was in, and he basically said, "I'm not going to put any pressure on you, but if you are in a position to do it, I'll come. I'll make it happen from my end. Even if we have to book it last minute, let's just know that that's on the table." And then I went back and got the results for the scan, and thankfully they were stable. So basically, I remember leaving and called my friend. It's like, "We're on." I was like, "I'm booking flight at 9." So I think I got my results maybe on a Thursday, and on Sunday I was on a plane to Europe.
Wow.
2 days later, I was watching the Tour de France come past in the Alps in France, which was incredible, and also particularly incredible to do it with such a an old friend who has seen all my sort of iterations of
Yes. What an incredible friendship to be able to do that with your friend. That's so amazing.
yeah, and it was so great how flexible he was just to drop everything like, okay, like let's do this. I realize how important this is to us as mates, and just that's the sort of thing I guess that makes life worth living, because you're having these experiences with people that you care very deeply about, and yeah, you understand how deeply they care about you, and that's just a very special thing. Like we even had a moment, I think, when we were having lunch on the side of the road in the Alps, and I don't know, we both just started crying because I think it was just so beautiful, like the moment that we were sharing, and we really appreciated why we were there, and we sort of acknowledged, how deeply the friendship runs. And it's one of those weird situations where I think, as we were discussing before, that you don't see this side of people unless you go through an experience like this. So it's that awful thing where you have to go through this terrible experience to sort of see this amazing side of people and the world.
Yeah, my best friend who I go through similar experiences with, she describes it as unlocking new levels of friendship. And it is really like that. We're always just unlocking other levels and getting to see what that's like with a friend. It's a really amazing part.
Yeah, I like that. Unlocking is such a great way to describe it.
Yes.
But then I guess, yeah, getting to the Norwegian part of this story. So similar to my friend Bard, who came to France with me to watch the cycling. I'd met this guy, Callum, maybe 3 months previously. We did a photography workshop together in the Grampians, and we just got along like a house on fire. Like he was such an awesome guy. And we were chatting after that. And I think that was sort of around the time where I was sort of going through like these scans that weren't looking amazing. And I just mentioned to him, I was like, "Oh, I did this hike last year that didn't go so well, but I'm thinking I might go back this year and try it again. Would you be interested in coming with me and we can document it?" And I never thought that he would say yes. I think that's one of those propositions that you put to people, and there'll always be an excuse. There's not time, not money, other commitments. But his first reaction was like, "Yeah, I mean, love the idea. Let's do it. Let's chat." So then he was sort of also in that position where I was with Bart, that you're sort of all riding on the results of my last scan, like whether it would happen or not. And then as soon as the results came back and they were positive, again, like I texted him, I was like, "We're on, like book the flight." So again, he met me over in Europe, and we actually had a week in France together, just like riding bikes and sort of getting to know each other essentially. Because I'd only met him twice in person before I met him on station in France, and I actually flown halfway around the world to sort of go on this adventure that I'd mentioned to him. And then yeah, we then went to Norway, and yeah, essentially started this hike together. And he told me the night before we started a hike, which was essentially went on for 3 weeks, that he'd never done an overnight hike before.
Oh, wow.
It was so cool because it was one of those things where he was just such a yes man, that he obviously didn't care about not being experienced or whatever. He's like, "Let's just have an adventure. Like, what can go wrong?"
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. What an amazing feat for both of you.
Yeah, so that was cool, and I think it was really such a great experience, particularly for me, the first 2 days with him, because it was the first 2 days that I'd done the previous year, and I'd had very different memories attached to everything, and I was so surprised how clearly I remembered the landscape. I was like, "Yep, this is where that happened, this is where that happened." Because when I was feeling like this, and it was sort of reliving this experience that I'd gone and done by myself, but then sharing it with someone. I was like, this is so cool to have this guy here who's able to sort of actually see physically like the stories I've been telling him about. And it was one of those things that we spoke about it at length, like during the trip and after the trip. It was such a big risk to go on such a long adventure with someone that I really didn't know. And I feel like it could have gone either way. Like we could have hated each other and gotten each other's nerves, but we just had this sort of similar kindred spirit that we just got along so well. And there was a few times, like the first 10 days that we were hiking, the weather was atrocious. We were just getting rained on. It was windy, it was muddy. We were walking through like it's like slippery, rocky terrain. Like Callum even, quite badly injured his groin at one point. It was like could barely walk. I thought he was gonna have to pull out. And even in some of the times that we were struggling, or there was one moment in particular, I think we just had to cross a river. And I remember writing in my journal, I was like, it was water that would have made Wim Hof cold. It was freezing. I've never been in so much pain through just sheer cold before.
Wow.
And then, like, obviously after that, you have to put your clothes back on. Like, and I remember we were just walking through a snowstorm and we basically got whited out where we couldn't see more than 10 meters in front of us and we lost the track. And he goes, how long does it take until you start developing frostbite? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, I haven't been able to feel my hands for an hour. So hopefully we've got a little bit more time.
Got it quite soon. Yeah.
But then even like in those situations, I was like, how are you, mate? Like, are you all right? And he just turned around to me with this beaming smile and he goes, mate, because this is awesome.
Wow.
It was just such a great thing to sort of, I guess, intuition just sort of made me ask him to come because I thought he was like such a cool, adventurous guy. And he
Yeah.
really, yeah, really lived up to that. And it was so much fun. I think we tried to recap a lot of what we were doing and discuss it. And I think the word that always came back to our experience was it was fun. It was so much fun with him. So that was amazing. I think we sort of pushed through those first 10 days of pretty atrocious weather and then came out and just I described it at one point as like champagne hiking because the Norwegian trails are rugged and beautiful, and you're in these landscapes that you can only get to by foot, and it's just views that you, could only imagine being on a postcard. And quite a few times, I caught myself just looking around and like almost with a tear in my eye, and just really appreciating how amazing it is to be alive. And
I have those moments all the time. Yeah, appreciating that stillness, especially when you're in nature. Yeah.
and just really acknowledging that you're doing what you want to be doing, and that could be hard. And I think that's one of those things where sometimes in life you sort of get into this routine that you didn't even really choose yourself,
Yeah.
and you sort of find it hard to break that. And I've been able to do that in the last couple of years, is just sort of really live deliberately.
Definitely. I live my life like I'm doing this because I want to, and I'm not doing things I don't want to do. And, as morbid as it is, I say, like, I have limited time left, but everyone has limited time left because none of us are living forever. I so I have no guarantee, just like the next person. So it's almost really nice. I say it's a silver lining to be just like redirected into exactly what I want to do. It helps me focus. It helps me figure out what's worth my energy and what's not.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was riding my bike with a good friend of mine recently, and we're just chatting about things, chatting about life, and I was giving him advice on a few things, and he gave me such a big compliment, which I was very touched by. And he just said, mate, I see you as the person who's on top of the mountain looking down with this incredible perspective that no one else has. That
Yes.
that summed it up so beautifully, that you get this perspective on life and what's important. having gone through something like this and continuing to live this experience. So I was even speaking to my psychologist recently. I was telling him about just being in this like really great place, just being happy. I'm just like feeling very settled in Melbourne. I find I've got this really great community around me, and like I've made some amazing friends in the last year or so. I just was, yeah, expressing these feelings to him, and he goes, "You know the irony here, right?" I was like, "What? Tell me." He goes, "The headlines of the story is man with brain cancer is the happiest he's ever been."
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a completely amazing perspective shift that we're able to get.
Yeah, there's downsides to it all. It's not all sunshine and lollipops. Definitely makes you see things differently and live more fully, which is an incredible experience to have.
Definitely. I think everything is put into perspective. I think it helps you connect with others as well. Like I find I can connect with people a lot more who have gone through similar traumas, whether it be cancer or the loss of a loved one, because life is just completely, erupted and you have to find yourself and what matters most to you. And I want to ask you about your trail before we go off that. So when you completed the trail, what's it like for you to push your body to those kinds of limits? While you know that you have a possible active regrowth, and you might be going through signs of, stress, or your body is going through stress. Do you sometimes get symptoms that possibly mirror brain tumor symptoms that make you stressed out while you're on this hike? Or but then you're also like, well, I am, obviously physically doing a lot right now.
Yeah, I'm certainly reminded of it often. Like I sometimes have what's called ice pick headaches, which is always they're just very sharp, intense headaches that literally just feels like you're being hit with an ice pick and the ice is cracking. They're very quick and very sudden and quite debilitating in the moment. And I think they occur enough that you're always reminded that like something's there. And even like having spoken to the doctors about it, that's not even necessarily a sign or anything to do with the tumor. Like that's just the nerves in and around like the scarring in the head and stuff, just like reacting to certain things. But it's definitely a reminder of like, okay, that's something that's there. And even on the trek, I feel like after that day that we like hiked through the blizzard and stuff, I got to the hut at the end of the night, and my like hand or like fist just clenched, and I like sort of couldn't unclench it, and I was started to think that maybe I was like having a seizure, which is something that I'd experienced in the recovery period of post surgery. So
Yes.
that's something that's always ever present. Like I really would prefer never to have an experience like that again.
Mhm.
So there's always those things, but I think in terms of pushing my body, I've realized how incredible the body is and how much the body can do under pressure. And I think a lot of it comes down to your mindset and what you're willing to put up with. And I've realized that I'm willing to put up with quite a lot. And I think it's fun to push your body to its limits. And I think I'll never be like some elite athlete or something, but this is sort of my version of seeing where my limits are and pushing that body because I know where I've come from in terms of how debilitating the surgery like was for just my active self, and just knowing that your body can get you from being in that state to being able to essentially hike what turned out to be, I think it was 430 kilometers over 20 days. And
Wow.
the altitude gain, I think we hiked the equivalent of like hiking up Everest twice.
Oh my goodness.
But that was just, yeah, a very nice achievement. And it's one of those things I feel like I haven't really even now that it's a couple of months post hike really processed what we achieved together, like Callum and myself. But I think again, I had all these plans to sort of go through and edit videos and make a big deal about the hike. And I think it kind of made me withdraw into myself a little bit and just be like, this doesn't have to be like this big public thing. It's more like you can just be proud and have had the experience, and that's enough.
And I think, yeah, you learn how to, when you go through brain surgery, you're like, wow, My body went through an immense amount of pain and trauma for something that was out of my control. It's something I didn't want, and it was something really negative. But how about I go through that, but for something I want? I can handle pain. I can handle hard things. I can do all of that stuff, and it's something I really want to achieve, and it's something I want, and I know my body's limits a lot better. So it definitely gives you a lot of, uh, understanding about your own body's capabilities.
Yeah. And I love doing that. I love that feeling because even one of the days that we had out on trail, one of the huts was closed because it was towards the end of the season. So essentially we had to hike just over 40 kilometers to get to the next hut for the day. And that was such a fun day knowing that we had this huge road ahead of us,
Yeah.
knowing that it was going to be a hard day and knowing that we were going to push ourselves physically and mentally. And we definitely had those highs and lows of the day, but you get to the hut at the end of the day and you realize like our bodies are awesome. Like we are so capable of doing so many things. And I think when you have that mindset, it's exhilarating because you realize what's possible.
And I always wanted to like show myself like I'm not some, sick, frail girl. I had this thing that was going on, but I'm totally capable. And in your case, beyond beyond what I can do. That's incredible.
Yeah. I think as I touched on before, it's just like it was also just fun, just to do it for yourself. I think almost felt this sense of urgency and obligation to become this fundraising person that's out there. And I definitely still have ambitions to do those sort of things. But I think just in the context of like this hike specifically, and I think the failed attempts on year one, I was just like, let's just go back and it's almost just sort of, it's not necessarily like getting closure, but it's just like, let's just go back and like, it doesn't need to be this big deal. Just go back and enjoy it. And I think by doing that, I didn't put any pressure on myself. And I was just so in the moment. And even Callum and I did such a nice thing that obviously like at times during the hike, like if you want to, you can get to places where you could get phone reception, but we made it a deal, or it wasn't even a deal. Like we discussed it before the hike and we just said, let's have 3 weeks of no phones. We'll just kick them off or on airplane mode the whole time and just be present. And that was such a special experience, particularly in this day and age where everyone's hyper connected. If you don't reply to someone quickly, it's sort of like, it was like, what's wrong? To have this 3 week period where we were just in the moment, like we get to the hut and like we talk and play games and be silly and
It's a bit of a detox. Yeah.
couple thoughts and just things like chat before you like go to sleep. And I feel like it's the first time in my life where I haven't been able to get to sleep because I was laughing too hard.
Wow.
Because it was like chatting and laughing and like you get the giggles. It's like I can't sleep because this is too fun and too funny and this is just such a great experience. So it's just so nice to have that side experience from the actual hike itself, to have this sort of digital where we were just really in the moment. And I think that made the whole experience fuller. And even having it with someone else just made it such a full experience. And it was kind of nice for me as well. It's almost this full circle moment because it was Callum's first time in Europe or Norway. And obviously there's a very iconic hike in Norway called Trolltunga. Sort of the translation is the troll's tongue. And it's this iconic rock that looks like the Lion King rock that sort of juts out over the fjord. And I discovered early into the hike that we could actually do a detour on the hike to get there and sort of extend the hike by a couple of days, which is actually why the hike that we did was longer than the official route, because we did a detour. But Trolltunga was the first hike I did in Norway when I moved there in 2014 as like a big overnight hike. And I remember at the time
Wow.
it was this huge deal, and I was out there with some like new friends I'd made, and it probably really instilled in me my love of hiking. So I think it was like this really beautiful full circle moment where I was out on this big adventure, and from there to like myself 11 years ago, probably would never have imagined that I'd be out here like on this 430-kilometer hike, having gone through a brain cancer diagnosis 4 years before, and still having the same feeling of awe and like inspiration from nature. And and probably even more so the second time.
Absolutely. Being able to return, that's such a nice feeling. And have you got any upcoming challenges or any goals in sight for yourself?
I've got one big one, which I haven't really told.
Okay.
So basically, I met a guy last year, and this is also a random story, but I met a guy on Reddit before I went to the Tour de France last year, because essentially I designed a hike to hike 5 days to coincide with the mountain stage of the Tour de France. But basically, when I got to the mountain, there was no way for me to get back to Nice, which I wanted to go to for the stage the next day.
Yeah.
So I simply put up a post on Reddit like, hey, I'm going to be here on this day. Is anyone going to be driving and can drive me back to Nice? So I met this guy on Reddit. He's like, yeah, I'm driving. You can jump in my car. And then we exchanged numbers and chatted on WhatsApp. And I sort of established that he probably wasn't some weird guy that was going to try and like abduct me in France. So I ended up, meeting him on the side of this mountain, and he drove me back to Nice in a car, like with him and his girlfriend and a couple of others. And we was on fire. It was one of those people that you meet and almost instantly you feel like you've known them for your whole life.
Mhm.
So we were chatting, and then him and his girlfriend lived in London, and I actually met up with them after my failed Norwegian hike because I left Oslo eventually and like went and stayed with a friend in London for a couple of weeks. I caught up with Barney and his partner Emma in London before I went back home, and I'd sent Barney this video that I'd watched on YouTube while I was recovering on the couch, feeling sorry for myself. And essentially, like this group of New Zealanders had gone over and ridden the exact route of the Tour de France, but a day before the professionals had ridden it.
Oh,
I thought, for someone like me watching that, just instantly I thought I should do that. That sounds and looks amazing.
yeah.
So I sent the video to Barney, and we caught up before I went back home for a Sunday roast. And I said, "Did you watch the video that I sent you?" He's like, "Oh, yeah." He's like, "That was incredible. We should do it." And that was the exact reaction that I wanted to get from him, having sent him the video. So essentially, we started to tentatively plan to do that same trip and ride the Tour de France route in 2027. So that's all things going well. The big goals. So I think for me now, it's just I'm very keen just to keep hiking, keep cycling, and stay fit and get fitter to essentially do 3 weeks of very hard cycling.
That's incredible. That's fantastic. I think
Yeah.
it's great always to have a goal up ahead, big or small, but to keep making plans. That's one thing I really like to do to help in general mental health and also just this very difficult, navigating path that we're on. Uh,
Yeah.
that's really exciting.
Yeah, and it's a goal that I have, and it's also something that I really want to get people involved in. I'd love to go across with a group of 10 friends or something and all do it together, because I think having done a few things solo and then having done the hike with Callum this year and doing it with someone else, I've really realized the value in bringing people along the journey with you. And I think it just makes it such a better experience because it's just nice sharing things with people. Even sort of bringing that into the context of brain cancer, it's sort of, you're not on your own. Like there's so many people that are around you, whether that's your family or friends or your medical team or just acquaintances that you meet through different events and that sort of thing. And I think that's what I really want to try and do is bring more people around and just make it this special experience with people that you love and care about. So yeah, I don't know if you like to ride bikes, but
I'm honestly not the best at balance. But I actually wish I could. Hearing about Callum not never doing an overnight hike and then going for it made me think, okay, maybe I could do it. And it's amazing. I think it's a real testament to your entire story. You've really made some amazing connections in this total reroute of your life. Just texting friends, hey, you want to come with me, or jumping in a random's car from Reddit and making a new connection. I think that's incredible and something you never would have predicted 5 years ago would be where you're at now, and friendships you would have made, and yeah, memories shared. That's really incredible.
yeah, and even like Barney, the friend that I made from Reddit, like he's coming out to Australia in a few months' time, and we'll go and ride out here and hang out. And so it's just it's incredible what you do when you go out and just have experiences, like who you meet and what comes of that, which I think is just such an amazing thing.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Andrew. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed. It's been an amazing follow for me. I think getting out there and experiencing true nature is something I love. And we're so blessed to have so much of it in Australia. But to push yourself and go overseas and do these incredible expeditions over 400 kilometers, it's not something I thought I was capable of. But now I am also inspired. So thank you so much. I hope our listeners have gained that too.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Heads Up with Em. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you're a brain cancer survivor, a caregiver, or someone just looking for some inspiration, remember you're not alone and your story matters. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review if you enjoyed the episode. It helps others find this space too. If you want to connect, you can find me on Heads Up with Em Instagram and my Instagram account, Emily Francesca Kirk. I'm excited to share more with you next time.